everybody, hope you're doing well and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be doing my August wrap up, and I like to do alliteration for some reason, but I read 13 books in August and 11 of them was audibly, so I'm calling this audiobook or August. Yeah, and then one was digitally and the final one was physically. So yeah, I didn't really read that much like actual reading. It was all just like audibly mostly, but I listened to 86.5 hours of audiobooks, and that is like over double the most I've done in a month, so I'm happy with it. I'm fine. I prefer reading physically. I don't know, this month I guess wasn't like the best, and I don't know, I just didn't really get around to doing actual much physical reading. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I read was Ghost Music by Anne Yu. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I didn't mind this book. It was fine. It follows the main character Son Yang in Beijing, and she is like a piano teacher, and she's basically just recently like moved in with her husband Bowen's mother, so like her mother-in-law, and she sort of like wants to start a family, but it's just sort of like difficult to do that at the time, and then she starts getting sent boxes of Yunnan mushrooms from a great missing pianist, and she also has these like weird dreams where she's talking to like a ghost mushroom thing in like a room, and there's also like some unraveling of Bowen's sort of like past and history. I didn't mind it. I did quite enjoy it, like how it started, but around like the 40% mark till the end of it, I did sort of get lost and I wasn't really enjoying it all that much. I still understood sort of what was happening. It was more just like no plot vibes, but I just didn't really get on board with the characters or like the story or like really anything much of the book, so I personally didn't really enjoy it. And yeah, but I guess maybe if I did get more on board with the magical realism parts and just like more invested, I might have liked it more, but I don't know. Then again, audibly, I listened to Sorry Bro by Talene Voskuni. I actually did sort of like a part of a review in like a video at the beginning of last month. And I quite like this book, and I'm giving it 4.25 stars. Basically, we're following the main character Na, and she is an Armenian American woman living in San Francisco, and she recently gets proposed to by her boyfriend, but she's a bit like nah, I don't know, so let's take a bit of a break, and she goes to this like Explore Armenia event because her mother and like family sort of like want her to find like a nice Armenian man, but the only person that she's interested in at this event is Erabuni, who is sort of like this fun, witchy, passionate woman, and that is because Na is actually bisexual, and she is known for a long time, but she just sort of is like hiding this part of herself because she thinks that her like the Armenian diaspora community and her family aren't like the most accepting. And over the time, whilst Na and Erabuni become like friends and bit more, they sort of like explore like their relationship, but also Na gets to reinvigorate herself back into her Armenian culture, with lots of things about like the food and history and like politics, and just like a lot of parts about Armenian culture, and each chapter actually begins with like a proverb in Armenian and English, and it's really like I really enjoyed them parts because they're really like succinct and just enjoyable. So yeah, I did quite like this book. It is marketed as sort of like a romance, but I would class it more as just a contemporary genre book. I think the romance and like more heavier topics and other things is balanced very well, and I did enjoy the sort of like the fluffy parts, but they sort of, I guess, take the back burner in some sense, and that is sort of maybe why I enjoyed it more than if it was just romance. But that is just something just to go into it if you are expecting all romance. It's not, it is more nuanced than that. Then I listened to These Days by Lucy Caldwell, or Cadwell, I'm not too sure how to pronounce her last name, and I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. I did quite enjoy this book. It was not too bad. I thought I would just maybe just read out my review because I sort of have a lot to say about it. Actually, I picked this book up because of a certain character being in a secret relationship with another woman, and whilst this story like clearly takes the back burner quite early on, I was still very invested. Little fiction has like really been written about World War II impact in Northern Ireland, with the primary focus being on Germany's like bombings in England, and specifically the London Blitz, but Belfast was actually hit just as hard. And in this book, Caldwell uses 3 attacks: Dockside, Easter and Fireside, to separate the book up, and she generates a narrative through the perspective of the Bells, who are an ordinary middle class family living in Belfast at the time. The patriarch, Dr. Philip, and their young son Paul don't really have any chapters of their own. Florence, the mum, has lived a seemingly happy marriage, creating a family, but living through World War One, the current events are bringing back past memories of a lost lover, Renard, and the life that she could have led. The oldest daughter, 21-year-old Audrey, I'd say plays the biggest role in the book. She is an office worker who's recently proposed to by her respectable doctor, whom marriage just seems the obvious next step in life. Her English friend Doreen makes her reconsider her actual love for him and whether there are other things that she might want to do instead. And then finally, the 18-year-old Emma is my favourite character. She's very sure of herself, what she wants. She volunteers as a first aider and starts a relationship with her older supervisor, Sylvia. But clearly, given everything that they're up against, this is something that is going to be hard to keep hold of. So I think the book holds the most power in its portrayal of like the ordinary person, and from the start it's clear Belfast is suffering from ongoing problems, but the Bells are doing quite well. There's rationing as a thing, but it's not as bad as in England. Also, Philip, Richard and Emma are like seemingly like professionally like ready for the casualties, but when the reality of civilian casualties and the huge numbers, it's sort of like an actual different story when you're actually dealing with it. And yeah, the actual bombings are one thing, but additionally the mindless searching for family and friends, lovers, pets, seeing your street demolished, having to identify someone by their boot alone, and many more. It's very harrowing, and Caldwell really does bring these horrors to life. Another point I enjoyed was how the book is used to give a voice to those that often didn't have one, with women clearly being the focus. Their role in the family and society is presented well, but also their desires, past aspirations and innermost thoughts too, which I couldn't fault one bit. And furthermore, the inclusion of 2 female queer characters and like their perspective in 1940s Belfast, then and still very religious city, was very good. But following on from this last point comes my main criticism of These Days, is that I personally didn't like how the narrative developed after a certain event around the halfway point. Already from the start I gathered my presumptions of how the plot and format would pan out, and that it was like proven wrong than what I had initially thought it was going to be, with Emma's lesbian relationship with Sylvia not being like a main plot point. To this I was quite dejected, but I did decide to carry on, and thankfully so, because I did enjoy the book as a whole. But other events further reduced the queerness of the book, and I felt that this was sort of a missed opportunity on Caldwell's part. An argument canon is made for her reasons, which I get, but I think a lot could have been said and messages withheld more gravitas had there been more done. And in a similar vein to not liking this particular part of the narrative, I did get quite lost in the third section of the book as we moved towards the end. Things weren't fully pulled together in my opinion, despite the work being done. Some outcomes were to my liking, but there was just maybe a few too many loose ends. The final issue is that there may be a few too many characters, but from the book's prescription I thought it was just going to be a dual POV from Audrey and Emma, but it's sort of like a mix between them, their mum, and some other like people that are within the city of Belfast, and just a general overview, which I wasn't the most keen on, to be honest. Final note is that the Northern Irish dialect references I did actually really enjoy, and it definitely gave me like Derry Girls vibes, because they say things like ween and so it is, so I did, so it was, and the like, which I like these little nibbits. And the inclusion of curse words I did find a little random and maybe cross at times though. And this was a book I read, was a arc of Bridge Life in Fragments by Idang Trung. This I believe comes out in November or December, I'm not too sure. I got it through NetGalley a while ago, and I am giving this 5 stars. This book is amazing. I think I'm going to do a whole review video on this book when it comes out, just to create a bit more buzz, but it basically is sort of like a memoir of Idang Trung and her family, and like how her parents and brothers lived through, like in Cambodia before the war, during the Pol Pot like genocide and Khmer Rouge regime, moving to Canada, and sort of like starting a life, and then also like later on in her life with her like working in education and like building a family, and her early cancer diagnosis and premature death. It's very emotional, it's very harrowing, and there is a lot to it that is just like it really hits you, but it's also extremely beautiful in some ways as well, and it's very vital. And I thoroughly enjoyed being educated on something I sadly don't know much about, and I feel like a lot of people don't know that much about the Cambodian genocide and its impact on people, and just it's a good exploration of one refugee's story, and she just does put a lot in. She puts so much into this book, and it is amazing. So I'm definitely going to do a whole review on this, and when it comes out, to create some more buzz and get people reading it, because I really recommend it. So yeah. Then I listened to Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is a reread for me. I read this last year. It was one of my favorite of the year. I just wanted like a book that I just knew I liked, and just something a bit more, just I wanted something atmospheric, and I listened to this audibly. I wanted just something that I could just get to grips with. I sort of knew the story. I did still like, it was still very like nice going through the story again, and just getting to know the characters, Kaya and Tate, so sweet, Jumpin and Mabel, yeah, I really like this book a lot, and the nature scenes are just so beautiful and so atmospheric, and they just transport you to the marshlands of Carolina. Yeah, I think I preferred reading it physically than audibly, but it was still very enjoyable and still a 5-star read for me. Then I listened to Savage Her Reply by Deirdre Sullivan. I gave this book 4 stars, and I thought I'd just read out my review as well, because it's a little bit long. But yeah, I did like this one. I said I won't describe any of the real much of the plot, but Savage Opera Reply is essentially a retelling of the Irish myth of the Children of Lear, told from the perspective of the story's antagonist Aoife. I'm ashamed to say I know nothing of Irish mythology and or legends, but with a little research and understanding this tale, it was first shared in post-Christianity Ireland. With messages sharing this. Whilst the book is evidently a feminist retelling with a woman being our main character, much analysis of the other female characters and the role of gender/sex in society, which is all incredible by the way. An argument can be made that Sullivan takes the story and infuses pre-Christian Irish religious or maybe non-religious in some sense traditions and messages, and in doing so reclaims the story in multiple ways. So it's not just a feminist retelling, it's also sort of like a harking back to pre-Christian Irish traditional retelling as well. I've read quite a fair few Irish contemporaries, one historical and now a mythological retelling, and once again Sullivan has followed the general trend of fitting her work in the literary genre as well. Her characters are rather nuanced and analysed, and this notion of the human or god condition is explored to some extent. Furthermore, the writing is very lovely to read, being hard to explain. It's rich and vivid, but also has a delicate quality to it as well. There are many lyrical and rather beautiful passages, but there is also an equal amount of brutality and darkness within this book, and the author does not shy away from the harshness of the story and what Aoife did, but also she explains why she did it. What I love most is that there's no victim blaming or retelling for the sake of it. Sullivan just wanted to show events through Aoife's POV, with her understanding that her actions were wicked ones. They were directed at innocence with short-lived desired consequences, but she felt guilt for centuries afterwards. Throughout the book, I did understand Aoife's character well and her reasons. I wouldn't say I agreed with her, but on the whole, she was a victim as well of the male mistreatment of women at the time she lived, and I think she still lives. I'm not too sure. And she sort of gave me Cersei vibes. So if you enjoyed Cersei by Madeline Miller, I believe I would recommend this book as well. It has a similar vibe. She has a similar character to Cersei from that book. The final quarter of the book did partly lose my interest, I would say. I did still enjoy the writing and I guess the overall story arc, definitely not as much as the start or middle, and maybe I would have preferred more emphasis on Aoife and the children/swans time during the 900 years in their 3 locations, and maybe more of their personalities. I listened to the audiobook narrated by fellow Irish woman Aoife McMahon, and she did an amazing job. Her voice was beautifully clear, and having an accent to match the characters you're representing, I think really adds to realising the story. I know in the physical copy there are supposed to be illustrations, but I wasn't able to see this, but I would like to pick up a copy if possible, to maybe reread in the future. So I would definitely look on the lookout for a pre-owned one of Savage Reply. Then I listened to Interviewing by William Seymour, and I've given it 3 stars. This book was fine. It was a short little story. It was about half an hour, I believe, audibly. It basically follows an unnamed main character as they're preparing for and go to a job interview. Clearly this person is struggling with anxiety and depression and possibly some other mental health issues, which I do think was handled quite well. This exploration of anxiety and how you're constantly thinking about, how did they see me, did I do something wrong, how did it go, and all these multiple questions that I sort of definitely could see and could relate to as well. It's in a monologuing, and yeah, I think it is quite realistic, but I do think that it lacks any real plot or much to the story, and they don't really have that much of an outcome, and yeah, I just thought it was fine, but it wasn't nothing special really. Maybe if it was like longer or it had more to it, it would have been able to say a bit more and like do something a bit more. But for what it was, I wasn't the most impressed. Then I listened to Burning Questions by Margaret Atwood. This I gave 4 stars. I would really recommend this essay collection. It's by one of the greatest contemporary minds that is still living, and I believe you should read this quick before her burning questions, burn out and turn to ash. In this book, she provides us with over 50 essays, book and just general author reviews, speeches, notes and other pieces of writing from the previous 20 years. From her fiction, she addresses an array of topics such as women's rights or lack thereof, and the current backtracking in regards to them, the state of the environment, politics and law, race, gender, sexuality and other societal aspects, literature and her own writing, and many more. Most are very well presented and written with it, but a couple go on maybe a little bit too long, a little wordy, and there are some repetitive thoughts and messages and ideas. It's clear the author is very educated in many facets of life, which he has so eloquently shared here, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I would say that the book is probably better to maybe go back and forth to, not just listen like all in one, or like one sitting, or like a couple of sittings. I think that it'll maybe get a bit more out of it if you was to go back to it. But yeah, also the narrators were split into around 20-ish people, give or take, which I thought was maybe a little bit strange. I would have maybe preferred a bit more consistency, but overall I would recommend this book, but maybe just take your time with it. Then I listened to The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Gave that 2.5 stars. I'm not going to talk about my review in this video because in September I've already listened to 2 more audiobooks of Tremblay's books, so I'm just gonna do a whole review video on the 3 of them ready for like Halloween time, so just look out for that probably around the end of the month maybe. But this book was okay. It started out well, but then it just went down and down and down. The only saving grace, and why I upped it to 3 stars on Goodreads instead of 2, is that there's like 2 like gay dads, and I just really like that, and I just sort of like seeing that inclusion in the horror genre, which I don't read much of like ever really, but I know compared to other genres it's not the most representative as like in comparison to maybe like contemporary or literary or romance, so that was just nice to see. And Tremblay didn't make their queerness like a plot point. It was just a family and they just so happened to be gay. That was just the fact. Like, so yeah, that's what I did quite like about the book. Then I listened to The Terrible Thing That Happened to Barnaby Brockett by John Boyne, and I'm giving this 4.5 stars. I did actually really enjoy this book. I'm just going to read out my review. This was such a great book and one I totally recommend no matter your age. In many ways, Barnaby Brockett retains lots typical of its children/middle grade genre, following a titular character as he grows up in Sydney, living as the only oddity within the normal family of the Brocketts because he defies gravity. When his unnaturalness gets too much for his parents, they make a terrible decision, and so Barnaby, along with us, the reader, get to take a journey around the world, and in doing so meet a whole cast of weird and wacky characters. A similar idea of the good, misunderstood and heroic child becoming the better person in comparison to their parents is prevalent, and whilst there are definitely other baddies in the book, the diversity and nuance is rather lovely. For many younger people, I feel some messages might go over their head, but for adults and the more eagle-eyed, Boyne does a lot in this book, which I truly appreciated. The whole range of characters have all dealt with this concept of otherness and being removed from their family, and in some way Barnaby acts as a hero, helping them to helping them on this journey of their own whilst also on a major quest himself. I think overcoming one's differences and just accepting people for who they are, embracing what makes us unique for a pro, not a con, is the key message in this book, and it's a lovely one, great for children to learn and pick up from a young age before the prejudices of adults can infect their minds. Despite seeming like the most normal couple in Australia, the Brockett parents really aren't all that. For starters, they did have a past life which led to them having this mindset in the current story, which we get a glimpse into, and I did really enjoy these parts. Secondly, they orchestrated something a very, very small number of parents would actually do to their child. And then thirdly, they're so focused on being normal, whatever that is, that their existence is rather robot-like, and on the whole it's not really that ordinary in the grand scheme of, like, especially compared to their neighbours, and they are sort of the real weirdos in the book when it comes down to it. So yeah, on the whole, I really recommend this book. It's great for children and adults alike, and the messages are just really lovely, and I cannot wait to read more books by Boyne. Then I listened to The Small Things by Lisa Thompson. Again, I'm giving it 3.5 stars. This is a short story that I did on the whole enjoy, but I did feel like it did lack some depth. It's definitely more suited to the children's audience that it is aimed at, and for this I think it is good. We follow Anna, who is asked to help the new girl Ellie in her school, but things are quite different because Ellie is too ill, so she can't attend in person. She uses this robot, which they call it Elliebot, to like learn instead. Whilst the two girls get to know each other, their similar struggles of how to fit in are highlighted, with Anna like lacking the income of some of her other classmates to do fun things after school, and Ellie, due to her physical barrier, separating her from the other children. I think it's a book that tilts on the consequences of lying. It's maybe sewn up a bit too easy, but I can see why, given the age range and the overall messages portrayed are a positive one. The robot was inspired by one the author sort of implemented in a classroom herself, and I did really like this idea of how she expanded on this and made a story about it. So yeah, would recommend it. It's definitely good, more suited for children though. I then listened to The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, and I've been giving this 4 stars. Once again, I'm not going to talk about this book because I want to watch the film soon, and I'm going to have a whole book and movie review video coming out. It's also sort of horror-y, a little bit gothic, a little bit mystery strange, so I feel like it might be one people might want to read for October or the spooky season, so I might get that out soonish, ready for that time to recommend it for that season of reading. But yeah, this book I enjoyed it sort of in a way, but I didn't particularly like it, if that makes any sense. Like it's objectively good, but I just didn't particularly like the story. But yeah, and then finally I read Summer by Laurie Lee, and I'm giving this 2 stars. I didn't really like this book. This is taken from his first autobiographical book, Cider with Rosie, but it's only the little snippets that are to do with the topic of summer, and it's quite nice in some things. Some of the writing's nice, and some like reminiscing on his like childhood and this sort of like innocence in a way, and there is some like struggles, but overall it is quite a nice childhood, and in the Gloucestershire countryside, which is all quite pretty and nice, but there's no real plot to it, there's no story, and I get that it's sort of part of the reason. It is sort of just about nothing in particular, but I feel like when I read things like that, I'm more reading it because I want to get to know the characters, and like I like the characters, or there was a lot to them. But there wasn't really much to these characters. They're real people. And I know it sounds a bit strange, but I didn't particularly like young Laurie, which is kind of weird to say that I don't like a child, but I don't know, I just didn't really like his attitude that much. He also makes references to like pretending to be a savage and some other racist remarks. And there is a couple in this tiny little book, and I get that it was more common when it was set, and when it was written in the late 50s, but I just didn't jam with it. I might possibly read some of Laurie Lee's like poetry or prose fiction, but I'm definitely not interested in any more of his autobiographical works. He's just not for me. Yeah, I just felt it's quite boring, quite flat, and I just didn't really particularly like it. So that's gonna go. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm not really feeling the best. I don't know if you can tell from the way I've just been presenting myself. I don't know. But I guess this month wasn't really the best as well, reading wise. Fragments was definitely the best book. Cannot wait for that to come out. It's really, really good. Also, I think Barnaby Brockett and Sorry Bro were probably my second two favourites of the month. But then the rest was just, I guess there wasn't really that many that just pulled me really upwards. But anyhow, hope you had a nice reading month in August and a good one in September currently, and it goes well as well. And I shall see you soon. Have a nice morning, evening, night, wherever you are in the world. Bye.